Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
My brother walked into our dad's living room 3 days after the funeral, picked up a photo, and said, "You can keep the tools. I'll take the house. Makes more sense since I have a family." I smiled like I agreed. But I already had the deed. He didn't even sit down first. Just strolled in with that entitled gait he's had since high school, where every room was his, every space owed to him just because he arrived. The scent of pine cleaner still clung to the old carpet where I'd spent the last 2 days on my knees, scrubbing up after hospice, throwing out the half-used bottles of morphine and Dad's socks rolled up in pairs like he might still be around to wear them. Mark had no idea what it looked like those final 3 weeks. He didn't see the way Dad stopped recognizing his own hands, or the nights he woke up crying for someone who wasn't even alive anymore. I handled that. Not because I was the daughter. Not because I was better. But because I stayed. And now here Mark was, standing next to the fireplace like he owned the place, flipping through our childhood photos like they were tokens in a vending machine. "Denise and the kids could really use the space," he said. "This apartment's just too tight." I nodded like I understood, which I did, but not in the way he thought. He didn't ask. He didn't offer. He just declared. Like the house was his to claim, and I should be grateful he was letting me keep the garage full of tools Dad hadn't even used in the last 5 years. He said it like it was a gift. A favor. "You're good with your hands anyway," he added. "And with no husband or anything tying you down, I figured the tools made more sense for you." That part stung more than I let show, though not because it surprised me. It was always the same song with him, Rachel the spinster, the tomboy, the independent one who somehow never quite measured up to a mortgage and a minivan. He thought the house would be wasted on me. He thought the family legacy, whatever that even means anymore, should belong to the one with the wife and the kids and the mortgage. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined in that neat little world where everything bends in his favor, was that our father had already made his decision. It happened on a Tuesday, just after his third stroke, when he was still lucid enough to sign his name, but quiet enough to know there wasn't much time left. He called me into the kitchen, sat me down at the table where he used to draw building plans for side jobs, and slid the paperwork across to me like it was just another grocery list. "I already talked to the lawyer," he said. "It's done. It's yours. I don't want to fight with Mark after I'm gone, and I don't trust him to treat this place like anything more than an asset." He said it plainly. Like it was the weather. Like it wasn't going to turn my entire relationship with my brother into a ticking bomb. So when Mark stood in the middle of the living room and said, "We'll probably move in by spring, give the kids time to settle," I just nodded. I let him build the whole fantasy in his head, every drywall renovation, every backyard barbecue, every picture-perfect moment of reclaiming our childhood house for his own picture-perfect life. I said, "Yeah, makes sense," because it was easier than correcting him. But inside, the gears were already turning. I let him talk about changing the kitchen, about painting the master bedroom. He made some comment about tearing down the shed, and I just smiled. He mentioned clearing out Dad's old desk, and I offered to help. I was so calm, you'd think I'd taken a sedative. But I hadn't. I was just holding a secret that tasted better than any comeback I could have thrown at him in that moment. Later that evening, after he and Denise left to give me space and head back to their Airbnb across town, I went up to the attic. The old wooden stairs still groaned the same way they did when I was 10, sneaking up there to read Dad's popular mechanics magazines and eat freeze-dried camping snacks he stored like he thought the world might end any day. At the back of the attic, behind a stack of brittle insulation panels and a trunk filled with broken Christmas lights, was a small steel lockbox. I still remembered the combination, same as the garage keypad. Dad never did like complicated passwords. Inside was the original deed, signed and stamped, tucked into a manila envelope labeled in Dad's shaky handwriting, "Rachel, for when it matters." I ran my fingers over the seal and smiled. Mark could have the tools. But I already had the house. And he was never going to see it coming. Mark showed up the next morning with a coffee in one hand and that annoying real estate swagger he can't seem to turn off, even around family, even at a house that, in his mind, already belonged to him. He leaned against the kitchen counter like it was his already, gesturing around like a general surveying land before planting the flag, talking about how much potential the place had. It was all so familiar, his tone, his assumptions, the way he tossed around phrases like open concept and natural light, as if Dad hadn't died here less than a week ago. As if the place hadn't been filled with oxygen tanks and pill bottles and hospice nurses just days earlier. Denise says the kids would love the backyard, he said casually, blowing on his coffee like this was just another morning at work. And with housing prices going where they are, I mean, come on. This would set us up for life. I gave him a look, neutral as I could manage, and nodded like I hadn't just been cleaning blood from the bathroom tiles a few nights ago. Sure, I said. Makes sense. That was my new favorite phrase. I'd been saying it so much lately it had started to lose all meaning, but it was the only thing that kept the conversation moving without me punching a hole through the drywall we patched together when I was 17. Dad had shown me how to cut new sheetrock, how to measure, how to hold the blade with confidence. Mark wasn't there. He was off at some internship or driving Denise to and from campus. I remember because Dad made me hold the flashlight while he worked late that night, the same way he used to hold it for his own father, and when I told him my arms were tired, he said, "You want it done right. You stick it out." Now, here we were, decades later, and Mark thought because he had a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage in another county, that somehow made him more deserving. As if the title of family man was a golden ticket that let him cut in front of every line without question. "You've always been more mobile," he said that morning, stirring cream into his coffee like he was making some point that should be obvious. "I mean, you don't have kids, you can work from anywhere, and it's not like you ever planned on staying here long-term anyway." I wanted to ask him what the hell he thought I was doing all those summers if not staying. Did he think those evenings spent on a ladder with a paintbrush in one hand and a beer in the other were just me passing through? That those early mornings with Dad in the garage, rewiring the fuse box or running copper pipe for the new sink were just me killing time? Did none of that count because I didn't pop out a couple of kids and buy a Subaru? Denise chimed in not long after, walking through the front door like she was touring a listing. She did that thing she always does, looking around with her eyebrows slightly raised, like everything was just a little beneath her. "You're so lucky, Rachel," she said, with a smile that never quite touched her eyes. "You don't have to worry about schools or space or uprooting anyone. You can just go wherever life takes you." I almost laughed, because if life had really taken me anywhere lately, it had been to the goddamn brink. Still, I smiled back. "Yeah," I said. "Lucky." They spent the next half hour talking about paint colors and removing the carpet and how the kitchen would look so much bigger if they knocked out the pantry wall. I stood there the whole time, nodding occasionally, pretending to make mental notes about tool storage in the garage and pretending I didn't already know what they didn't, that this wasn't their decision to make. At one point, Mark said, "I could probably get a cash-out refi once this place is in my name. Maybe flip the whole property eventually. That'd give us a nice cushion for the kids' college fund." I smiled politely and reminded myself to breathe through my nose. I thought about how many nights I spent on this very floor, laying down new tile with Dad while he explained how to level the grout, how to avoid air bubbles, how to pay attention to things no one else would ever see. "Dad taught me everything," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I wired that attic when I was 15, maybe younger. Probably like 7 years ago, if I do the math right." Neither of them caught the mistake. Or maybe they were too caught up in their own delusions to hear it. Denise was already on her phone texting, probably updating her friends about the house they're inheriting or whatever version of the truth she had already decided to believe. I waited until they left that afternoon before pulling out my phone and scrolling to a number I'd saved but hadn't used yet. Lisa, local realtor. Friendly, fast, discreet. Dad mentioned her once years ago, said she was one of the few agents who didn't treat him like a fossil when he called for comps. I hit call. When she answered, I kept my voice even, like we were discussing nothing more serious than dinner plans. Hi, Lisa. I'd like to schedule a walkthrough of a property. Yeah, for next Tuesday. I'll be the only one on the deed. As soon as I hung up, I looked around the room again, not as a daughter, not as someone holding memories, but as an owner. And I realized something Mark would never understand. Sometimes the person who's been holding the flashlight all along is the one who learned how to build the whole damn house. The morning Lisa was scheduled to come by, I made sure to open every window in the house, letting the cool air drift through the rooms like a silent goodbye. I wanted her to see the place at its best, not just as the structure that had held my father's last breath, but as the home it had been before, filled with light, purpose, and the smell of sawdust and bacon on Saturday mornings. I vacuumed the living room twice, polished the banister with an old rag from Dad's drawer, and made sure to clear the clutter off the counters. Even grief, I figured, could be temporarily shelved if you needed the house to look like it hadn't just survived a storm. Lisa showed up 10 minutes early, just as I was brushing a streak of dust from the edge of the dining room table. She had the kind of presence you immediately trusted: simple blazer, clipboard in one hand, and a no-nonsense ponytail that bounced when she walked. She stepped through the doorway like she'd done it 100 times before, and maybe she had, in other people's grief, in other people's childhood homes, but she didn't treat mine like just another listing. She looked around and nodded thoughtfully, and when she spoke, it was with a softness that made me feel like maybe this wouldn't be as hard as I'd expected. It's got bones, she said, running her fingers along the doorframe like she was reading a map. Real ones. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. Did your dad build that banister himself? I smiled, a little sad. He did, I said. We sanded it down together the summer after my mom passed. Took us 3 days and 2 beers too many. She chuckled politely, then got to work. She moved from room to room with the focus of someone who actually cared about her job, asking a few questions here and there when the furnace was last updated, whether the windows were double pane, how old the roof was. I answered as best I could. Dad kept records of everything, filed neatly in a gray cabinet in the basement. He was meticulous like that, a man who believed in documentation the way other people believe in religion. I'll need to get some exterior shots before I leave, Lisa said, pulling her phone from her coat pocket and sliding it into a stabilizer. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. I nodded and walked her out the front door, where the sun had finally started to cut through the early chill. She began setting up just as I remembered I hadn't touched the garage. I still need to clean out the back, I said, gesturing toward the small, detached unit where Dad kept his tools. It's a mess, full of sawdust and 30 years of my needs. Lisa grinned. I've seen worse. Just make sure I get a peek when you're ready. That's when I heard the tires crunching against the gravel, the slow growl of an engine I recognized far too well. Mark's SUV pulled into the driveway like it was reclaiming territory, parking at an angle that blocked Lisa's view and kicked up a fine spray of dust that settled over her equipment. He stepped out with that pinched look he gets when he's late to something and blames everyone else. The moment he spotted Lisa holding her phone and angling for a shot of the porch, his expression twisted into something ugly. What the hell is this? He asked, walking fast, pointing. What's going on here, Rachel? Lisa paused, clearly confused. Hi, she said carefully, extending a hand. I'm Lisa. I'm just doing a walkthrough. For what? Mark barked, ignoring her handshake and stepping between us. You're selling the house? This house. I shrugged, calm as ever. Just exploring options, I said, folding my arms. Thought I'd see what the market looks like. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Are you out of your mind? You don't have the right to list this place. This isn't your call. Lisa looked between us, her eyebrows narrowing. Wait. I'm sorry, she said slowly, turning to me. He's your what? My brother, I said, meeting Mark's eyes. Just visiting. Lisa blinked. But your name's the only one on the deed. And just like that, Mark stopped moving. There are some conversations you don't realize are final until years later, when you replay them in your head and suddenly hear what wasn't said out loud, the space between words heavy with meaning. My last real talk with Dad wasn't framed as a goodbye, but it may as well have been, because looking back, I can see how tired he was, how carefully he chose each word, how he never quite looked me in the eye, like if he did. The weight of what he was handing over would make him crumble right there at the kitchen table. It was about a month before the stroke that took away his speech, and maybe 2 weeks before that, I caught him standing out on the porch with a yellow envelope in his hand, his fingers curled tight around it like it was something sacred. He didn't say much at the time, just nodded, muttered something about getting things in order, and asked if I wanted coffee. But that night, as we sat across from each other, the ticking of the old wall clock louder than usual, he said it plainly. "The house is yours, Ratch." I remember setting down my mug, blinking like he'd just spoken in a language I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, rubbing the back of his neck like it pained him to say it out loud, "I had it transferred. Paperwork's already in. You're the owner now." I stared at him. "What about Mark?" He scoffed, not cruelly, just tired. "Mark's fine. He's always been fine. He's got his job, his kids, his life. And more importantly, he's never given a damn about this place unless there was something in it for him." I wanted to argue, not because I disagreed, but because it felt wrong, like I was taking something that should have been discussed as a group. "But he's your son too." Dad nodded. "And you're the one who stayed." It landed heavier than anything else he said that night. And when I asked him why he didn't tell Mark himself, he just smiled faintly and said, "Because I don't have the energy for another fight." "And you, Rachel, you'll handle it." "You always do." Now, in the days after Lisa's accidental reveal, I found myself back in that same kitchen, holding that same envelope, flipping through the documents with fingers that still smelled like wood polish and metal from sorting the tools Mark had left behind. The deed was there, properly signed, notarized, and already processed through the county office. No loopholes. No contingencies. Just a quiet, deliberate decision my father had made, trusting that I wouldn't crumble under the pressure when the time came. The text started later that afternoon. Denise, of course, was the first to chime in. Her message read like it was written by a lawyer's wife pretending not to be furious. "Hey, Rachel, just checking in. Mark's really overwhelmed with everything going on, and I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Maybe we can talk? We're all family, and it would be great to resolve this without involving anyone else." I didn't respond. An hour later, "I know you've been under stress too, but please understand how hurtful this is. This house was part of Mark's childhood too." Another message came in from a number I didn't recognize, probably one of Mark's coworkers, or maybe a friend he dragged into this out of desperation. It was a screenshot of a lawyer's business card and a simple sentence, "You'll be hearing from someone soon." But I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I just tucked the phone away and walked down to the basement, needing a minute to breathe somewhere Dad's voice still seemed to echo off the concrete. The air was cooler there, thick with the smell of dust and metal and that faint sweetness of old insulation. I walked slowly along the wall, past his old vise and the workbench still lined with perfectly labeled jars of screws and nails, past the boxes I'd started sorting and hadn't yet had the heart to open. I stopped at the furnace, a beast of a thing that had been patched and tinkered with over the years until it ran smoother than anything built in the last 2 decades. And there, wedged behind the vent panel, almost hidden but just visible if you knew where to look, was a folded piece of notebook paper sealed with duct tape. My breath caught. I pulled it out gently, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from knowing, deep in my gut, that this would be something meant for me alone. I peeled back the tape, unfolded the sheet, and stared down at my father's handwriting, shaky but still unmistakable. It said only one sentence: "I know who showed up when it mattered." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to make peace between his children or ease the blow of what was coming. Just a quiet truth from a man who didn't have the energy for speeches anymore. I stood there for a long time, reading the sentence over and over, letting the weight of it settle into my chest like a final nail in a door that would never swing open again. Because Dad hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me a choice. And I was finally ready to make it. It was a Wednesday morning when the for sale sign finally went into the ground, and the sound of the metal post sliding through the dry front yard dirt was more satisfying than I could have imagined. I didn't even have to do it myself. Lisa showed up with her little sign kit and hammered it in while I stood on the porch sipping coffee from Dad's old ceramic mug, the one with the chipped rim and the faded Union 76 logo on the side. I hadn't touched it since the night he passed, but something about that morning felt final, ceremonial, like a page being turned in a book that had taken too long to write. The sky was gray, the kind of dull overcast that made the neighborhood look washed out, and I figured it was fitting. Nothing about this was supposed to be bright or easy. The sign wasn't flashy. Just the classic red and white with Lisa's contact info at the bottom, flanked by a brochure box she filled with glossy printouts that showed the kitchen without its clutter and the living room bathed in natural light. I'd helped her stage it the day before, tucking away Dad's chair, folding up the wool blanket he always tossed across his lap in winter, hiding the photos from the mantel that showed a younger version of me standing next to a man who built this house one beam at a time. Lisa gave me a nod once it was done and said she'd follow up later in the day. I told her thanks and went back inside, letting the screen door slam shut behind me because I didn't need to be polite anymore. I made it as far as the hallway when I heard the sound of tires screeching on gravel. I didn't even have to look out the window to know who it was. Mark's voice came before the engine had stopped, shouting across the yard like someone was drowning and trying to be heard above the waves. "Rachel, what the hell is this? Are you kidding me right now?" I walked to the door but didn't open it right away. I watched him from behind the curtain, his face red, his shirt wrinkled like he'd thrown it on in a rush, phone in one hand, the other waving at the sign like it was a flag from an invading country. When I finally stepped out, I didn't say a word. Just stood there, arms folded, while he stormed up the steps like he still believed he had the right to demand anything from me. "You listed it," he said, his voice rising with every syllable. "You actually listed Dad's house? After everything? After what he meant to this place?" I didn't flinch. "Yes," I said. "I did." "You had no right," he began, but I cut him off. "I had every right, Mark. I own it. Legally, officially, and entirely." He looked like he wanted to punch the siding. "You manipulated him," he spat, stepping closer. "You waited until he was sick, then you convinced him to sign everything over to you." "That's not what happened," I said, my voice flat but steady. "He made the decision. He did the paperwork. I didn't even ask." "That's bullshit," Mark said, now pacing like a caged animal. "You tricked him. You took advantage." I could have told him about the conversation in the kitchen, about the envelope in the safe, about the weeks of care, the nights on the couch, the adult diapers and hospice visits, and everything he hadn't been around to see, but I didn't. I didn't know him that. Then Denise pulled up in her black SUV, parked crooked in the driveway like she owned the concrete, and got out with the same smug, superior posture I'd known since we met freshman year of college, back when she thought I was cute for being quirky. Now she looked like she wanted to slap the for sale sign out of the ground. "This is going to destroy the family," she said, walking up to me like she hadn't been sending passive-aggressive texts all week. "You're turning this into some sick power trip." "No," I said, turning to face them both. "I'm ending one." They stood there, silent for half a second, long enough for me to hear the sound of a neighbor's lawnmower fire up in the distance. I looked at both of them, my brother, red-faced and furious, and his wife, tight-lipped and trembling with fake concern, and I said the thing I knew would split the earth right beneath them. "You wanted the house," I said. "You just didn't want to earn it." Mark took a step back like I'd slapped him. Denise looked away, as if she wasn't ready to see the version of me who didn't apologize for finally standing taller. I didn't wait for them to speak again. I walked back inside, grabbed my duffel from the living room floor, and tossed it into the passenger seat of my car. I didn't take a long look around, didn't do the sentimental sweep. The memories would live with me whether I stared at the damn wallpaper for another hour or not. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced once in the rearview mirror, not at the house, not even at the front door, but at the two people still standing there, stunned and silent, finally realizing that the rules of this family had just changed. At the next stoplight, I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the note I'd folded and tucked away the night before. The paper was creased now, worn at the edges, but the words were still clear. I know who showed up when it mattered. I stared at them, then folded the paper again and slipped it back into its envelope. I didn't sell it to hurt him. I sold it to remind him respect is earned, not inherited. Even if it takes losing a house to finally learn that.